criticism of the Trump administration on the Epstein files. Then some pretty loud criticism on immigration policy, on ICE, on the actions ICE taking, and now on this war in Iran, saying none of this is the package that we saw in Donald Trump and voted for. This violates all of that. So at some point, it's not a one-off. At some point, the whole thing isn't what you voted for.
And John, yesterday we get the news out of Doral that the White House is, and by the way, there's a smart political move. I've been looking at the TV camera for months saying they need to do this.
We begin tonight with the cold, hard facts of a broken promise and a rising body count. 7 United States service members are dead in the Middle East. 168 people, mostly school children, have been killed in a strike on an Iranian girls' school. The American taxpayers are currently paying $1 billion every single day to fund Operation Epic Fury. The President of the United States campaigned on a solemn promise to the American public to end endless wars and keep the country out of senseless conflicts. Now we have a brand new war. We have a war with no clear definition of why we entered it, leaving millions of voters feeling entirely betrayed.
What just seems so insane based on what he ran on. I mean, this is why a lot of people feel betrayed, right? He ran on no more wars and these stupid, senseless wars, and then we have one that we can't even really clearly define why we did it.
You know, it's so interesting, Willie. Joe Rogan, the scales falleth from his eyes. You had Andrew Schultz, who was sort of, you know, is he MAGA curious or was he a MAGA supporter? Whatever he was, he's not anymore. Like, he's firing on, you know, all cylinders against.
President Donald Trump claims that the current war in the nation of Iran is merely a short, necessary mission that will end very soon. That is a lie. President Donald Trump claims that his domestic immigration enforcement forces are strictly targeting and deporting only the worst of the worst violent offenders from American neighborhoods. That is a lie. The administration claims that foreign powers and foreign governments do not dictate the military operations of the United States Armed Forces. That is a lie. We will examine the forensic evidence tonight. We will look at the exact words spoken by the officials in power. We will look at the exact policies being enforced on the streets. We will look at the victims of these policies. We will not entertain political theater. We will not look at both sides of the aisle. We will only look at the facts as they are recorded in the permanent public record.
Of course, this was such a staple of all of President Trump's remarks last year. And when they were focusing on deporting the so-called worst of the worst, it was still relatively popular. And certainly Americans like the idea of a closed southern border, polls suggest. But as this got, you know, as the moves got more aggressive, if it moved into like your neighbors, your friends, you know, moms waiting to pick up their kids from school, it was all, the American public was already souring on this last year, at the end of last year. And then we add to it what happened in Minnesota, the confrontations, the violence, the 2 American deaths. It has become politically toxic. The president's well underwater on this. There's finally been a realization from the White House.
We must clearly define the lie before we can methodically dismantle it. We begin with the explicit statements made by the President of the United States, Donald Trump. President Trump recently stood before cameras at a press conference at Trump National Doral, Miami. He spoke directly to the American people about the military conflict with Iran. He provided an exact characterization of Operation Epic Fury. President Trump said, quote, "This was just an excursion into something that had to be done." He went on to say, quote, "We are getting very close to finishing that too." He demanded nothing less than unconditional surrender from the leadership of Iran. This is the first lie. The claim that this is a brief, manageable excursion that is nearly finished. The second lie comes from the administration's claims regarding domestic border policy. For the past year, President Trump and his closest allies made a central promise to the electorate. The promise was that the administration would focus its mass deportation efforts strictly on the worst of the worst. They claimed they were only targeting violent offenders. They claimed they were restoring law and discipline to the border. This is the second lie.
All of these things, and they're still going on. Only 7% of the people that were being detained were the worst of the worst.
Well, and that's the point. I mean, it is true that U.S. citizens got sucked into this and were treated terribly and murdered. And the investigation's taken away from the state where it happened, so that accountability isn't even real either. And that is frustrating, and everyone can see that with their eyes. But it's also what's happening to undocumented people people here on American soil all get treated the same way, and they are given due process, and they have rights. And these ICE thugs just ran over everything that...
The final lie is the claim of absolute presidential independence in foreign policy and military deployment. When asked directly by ABC reporter Rachel Scott if the nation of Israel forced the United States into striking Iran, President Trump called the claim bogus. President Trump stated, quote, "If anything, I might have forced Israel's hand." This is the third lie. We have identified the speaker. The speaker is the president. We have identified the authority. The authority is the White House. We turn now to the forensic evidence from the provided sources. We rely exclusively on the documented record. We look first at the claim that the Iran war is a short excursion. The forensic evidence proves this is false. We have public polling data from Quinnipiac. The Quinnipiac poll shows that nearly 3/4 of voters believe the conflict will not end quickly. Exactly 71% of respondents stated they expect the war to last months, about a year, or longer than that. Representative Tim Burchett, a Republican from Tennessee, stated on the record that supporters should be concerned and vigilant, warning that the conflict could turn into another long and costly war.
Focus on the part where we're going after violent offenders.
Worst of the worst.
Well, that is what people voted for. Seal the border, get the worst of the worst. But that's not what's been happening. So that horse has left the barn. You can't suddenly say, no, actually what we're doing is going after the worst of the worst, when we've all seen what we've seen with our own eyes on television, and people have seen what they've seen in their communities, where people who've been here for 20 years and owned a restaurant and been tax-paying members of the community are getting pulled out and sent back to their countries of origin.
Because, Jonathan, I've always said my parents, if they were alive, they would have been deeply offended by how open the borders were during the Biden administration, during the first few years of the Biden administration.
We look next at the human and financial cost. The evidence proves that Operation Epic Fury is costing the American taxpayers an estimated $1 billion every single day. The evidence proves that 7 United States service members have already been killed in action. The evidence proves that a United States strike hit an Iranian girls' school, resulting in the deaths of 168 people. Another report places the death toll at around 175 people, noting that the victims were mostly school children. This evidence proves the massive scale and the devastating human cost of the operation. It proves that this is not a minor excursion. It does not prove the final duration of the war, but it proves the severe immediate consequences. We look next at the claim regarding foreign influence. The evidence proves that foreign interests heavily influenced this war. Senator Marco Rubio admitted on camera that Israel informed the United States they were going to attack Iran. Senator Rubio admitted that Israel told the United States that Iran would retaliate against the United States if Israel carried out that attack. Senator Rubio admitted that the United States joined Israel in going to war specifically because Israel was going to attack Iran. Former Secretary of State Tony Blinken stated that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has wanted to attack Iran for 40 years. The evidence further proves that Senator Lindsey Graham made multiple trips to Israel over the last several months. He traveled there to coach Israeli intelligence, Israeli government members, and Benjamin Netanyahu on exactly how to manipulate Donald Trump to get him to go to war against Iran. Senator Graham then went on live television on Fox News and stated, quote, "I am not with you, I am with Israel. I will be with Israel until the day I die." The evidence proves that the administration is acting on foreign interest. It does not prove that President Trump is entirely powerless, but it proves his military decisions were explicitly manipulated by foreign coaching. Finally, we look at the forensic evidence regarding the domestic deportation lies. The evidence proves the administration is not just targeting the worst of the worst. The data shows that only 7% of the people being detained actually fit the description of the worst of the worst. The evidence proves that undocumented people who have lived in their communities for 20 years, owned restaurants, and paid taxes are being pulled out. The evidence proves that United States citizens were sucked into these operations. The evidence proves that United States citizens were treated terribly and murdered. The evidence proves there were violent confrontations in Minnesota resulting in 2 American deaths. The evidence proves that a man on the ground with his weapon taken away was shot 8 times in the back. The evidence proves the killings of Renee Good and Alex Predit, which were described as execution style. This evidence proves a severe lack of discipline among new ICE and Border Patrol recruits. It proves the administration's stated focus on violent offenders is a complete fabrication. We must analyze the strict mechanics of power and control for each piece of evidence. In the United States government, constitutional power is centralized in the executive, but operational control can be entirely subverted by outside actors. We examine the power dynamic between President Trump and the Israeli government. The president holds the constitutional power as the commander-in-chief of the armed forces, but the evidence shows exactly who controls the narrative and the military deployment. Senator Lindsey Graham used his congressional power and his access to travel to Israel and actively coach a foreign government on manipulating the American president. This represents a total inversion of constitutional power. The president holds the office, but foreign leaders and rogue senators are exerting direct control over the deployment of the American military. We examine the power dynamic involving international campaign finance and personal enrichment. The evidence shows that the nations of Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates are the primary source of most of Donald Trump's money for his cryptocurrency ventures. The government of Qatar even gave him a private jet. Senator Graham is now openly threatening Saudi Arabia because he feels they are not enthusiastic enough in their participation in the war against Iran. This shows a direct, irrefutable link between the president's personal financial enrichment by foreign powers and the exertion of control by his political allies over those exact same powers. We examine the power and control dynamics of domestic immigration enforcement. Stephen Miller holds the official title of Deputy Chief of Staff in the White House. The evidence describes this as a lowly title, but explicitly notes that he possesses an enormous amount of operational power. Stephen Miller controls the actual deportation quotas on the ground. He issues hard numbers to federal agents on the streets. He dictates exactly how many people must be rounded up to satisfy the policy. The federal agents out on the streets are meeting quotas set directly by Miller, which entirely supersedes the power of local law enforcement and contradicts the administration's stated policy of solely pursuing violent offenders. The White House holds the overarching political power, and they have recognized that these policies are failing catastrophically. The White House held a meeting at Doral to tell House Republicans to stop talking about mass deportations because it is killing them in the polls. But the quotas themselves have not been rescinded. Stephen Miller still retains absolute control over the enforcement numbers. Power is held nominally by the White House, but control is wielded ruthlessly by unelected deputies enforcing strict quotas that result in the deaths of American citizens. We must confront the strongest defense arguments presented by the administration and their surrogates. The strongest defense argument regarding the war in Iran is the claim of urgent national security and military precision. President Trump attempted to justify the war by claiming that the nation of Iran was close to developing a nuclear weapon. He claimed that the United States and Israel needed to carry out preemptive strikes before Iran struck first. Furthermore, political commentator Scott Jennings vehemently defended the administration's military actions after the devastating strike on the Iranian girls' school. Jennings argued that the United States military does not intentionally target civilians in war. This is their strongest defense. We will now dismantle it using the law and the sources. The defense claims surgical precision and a strict focus on military targets. The forensic evidence shows that an American strike hit a school facility and killed 175 people, mostly school children. You cannot claim surgical precision or the avoidance of civilian casualties when the direct result of your strike is 175 dead children in a learning environment. The defense claims the strike was purely preemptive to stop an imminent nuclear threat against the homeland. The evidence, however, reveals the true origin of the military conflict. Senator Marco Rubio admitted on the record that Israel told the United States they were going to attack, and the United States joined them solely because of that impending Israeli action and the fear of subsequent Iranian retaliation against the United States. The motivation was not stopping an imminent nuclear launch against America. The motivation was joining a foreign ally's offensive operation. We move to the strongest defense regarding domestic border policy. The defense claims that the administration is simply sealing the border, restoring order, and removing dangerous criminals from society. They claim they are protecting American neighborhoods from the worst of the worst. We dismantle this defense using the documented facts on the ground. The administration's defense completely crumbles when we look at the actual detention statistics. The record shows that only 7% of those detained were actually the worst of the worst. The administration claims they are strictly enforcing the law, but the evidence shows they are violently violating fundamental constitutional rights. The evidence states that undocumented people on American soil have rights, and they are owed due process under the law. Instead of due process, ICE thugs just ran through communities without oversight. The defense of protecting American citizens is entirely destroyed by the fact that United States citizens were sucked into this enforcement dragnet and murdered. There were execution-style killings in the state of Minnesota. A man was shot 8 times in the back while lying on the ground after his weapon was taken away. These are not the actions of a lawful border enforcement operation. These are the actions of an uncontrolled force meeting political quotas set by a deputy chief of staff. The defense is factually and legally fraudulent. We must pause for legal education in plain English. We must understand the foundational legal principles that govern these governmental actions. Under the law of the United States, any individual present on American soil is entitled to due process. The Constitution does not restrict fundamental due process rights exclusively to recognized citizens. As the evidence clearly states, undocumented people here on American soil all get treated the same way, and they are given due process and they have rights. Due process means that the government cannot simply grab you, declare you guilty without a trial, and remove you without a fair legal procedure. When federal agents are sent into local streets to meet numerical quotas rather than to execute specific court-authorized warrants for violent offenders, they bypass due process entirely. When a person is lying on the ground, completely disarmed, and is shot 8 times in the back, that is a severe violation of the most basic legal constraints on the use of deadly force by law enforcement. The evidence refers to the killings of Renee Good and Alex Predit as an execution-style event, and notes that a jury in the future will have to determine the criminal connection. We must look at historical legal precedent. The evidence specifically notes that the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing in Birmingham and the events in Selma awakened a sleeping nation. Those historical events motivated moderate whites to support civil rights and demand that Black people not be treated like third-class citizens. The evidence states that similarly, the combination of the Renee Good and Alex Predit killings will awaken a sleeping nation today. Under the law, accountability requires independent, transparent investigation. When an officer-involved killing occurs, standard legal procedure demands an unbiased review. But the evidence shows that the investigation into these deaths was actively taken away from the state where it happened. The legal consequence of removing local jurisdiction is the complete destruction of real accountability. In the context of the military, the laws of armed conflict strictly prohibit the targeting of civilian populations. While the defense claims they do not target civilians intentionally, the legal standard also requires proportionality and the absolute avoidance of reckless actions that predictably result in mass civilian casualties. A military strike that kills 175 people, predominantly schoolgirls, raises profound, inescapable legal questions about adherence to the rules of engagement and international law. The law requires strict adherence to these principles. The evidence shows a complete and systemic abandonment of them. We now apply professional judgment on the responsibility and fitness of the public officials involved. We look at the fitness of President Donald Trump. A fundamental requirement for the commander-in-chief is to prioritize the security, stability, and interests of the United States above all else. The evidence demonstrates that the president was manipulated into an incredibly costly war by a foreign power and a rogue senator. A president who can be actively coached into launching a military conflict that costs $1 billion a day and American lives is a president who lacks the independence and strategic judgment required for the office. Joe Rogan, a prominent media figure who has tens of millions of listeners, publicly described the president's actions as insane. He noted that people feel betrayed because the president ran on a platform of ending endless wars, but launched one immediately. A national leader who completely contradicts his core campaign promise with such devastating international consequences demonstrates a profound unfitness to govern. Furthermore, the president is described in the sources as completely dumb, stupid, delusional, and narcissistic. He is underwater in the public polls on every single major issue facing the country. He is -3 on immigration. He is -17 on the economy. He is -24 on inflation. His approval rating on the handling of the war is only 40%, while 55% strongly disapprove. His fitness is further compromised by his reliance on individuals like Stephen Miller. Allowing an unelected deputy to set street quotas that directly result in the deaths of Americans and the systemic violation of constitutional due process is a gross abdication of presidential responsibility. The president's fitness is further degraded by his constant gaslighting of the public. He has gaslighted the public over the Jeffrey Epstein scandal, heavily redacting the files to protect powerful billionaire guys. He executed a crazy pressure campaign against late-night host Jimmy Kimmel. He previously kidnapped Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. The president has failed the most basic fundamental tests of leadership, discipline, and legal compliance. We do not make these claims in a vacuum. We rely on an expert authority stack. We rely on the individuals directly cited in the official record. First, we have Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan is the host of the most streamed podcast on Spotify, averaging about 11 million views per episode. He is a prominent voice who previously endorsed Donald Trump, giving his current criticism immense political weight. Second, we have Michael Shellenberger. He is an author and journalist who brings analytical rigor to the assessment of the administration's stated goals for regime change in Iran and Venezuela. Third, we have Senator Marco Rubio. Senator Rubio is a sitting United States senator who provided direct, on-camera admission of the intelligence sharing and military coordination between Israel and the United States. Fourth, we have Tony Blinken. He is the former Secretary of State of the United States. He possesses direct, high-level knowledge of 40 years of diplomatic history and Benjamin Netanyahu's continuous efforts to persuade American presidents to attack Iran. Fifth, we have Representative Tim Burchett. He is a Republican House member from Tennessee and a member of the House Republican Israel Caucus, who publicly warned supporters about the prolonged nature of this war. Sixth, we have the polling experts. We rely on the Quinnipiac poll and the YouGov Economist poll, which provide verified statistical evidence of the electorate's deep disapproval and their expectation of a long, drawn-out conflict. Finally, we have prominent conservative commentators Tucker Carlson and Megyn Kelly. Tucker Carlson called the strikes absolutely disgusting and evil. Megyn Kelly correctly identified it as Israel's war. We also note the input of Andrew Schultz, who was MAGA curious and is now firing on all cylinders against the administration. This is a formidable stack of journalists, former cabinet officials, sitting lawmakers, and institutional polling agencies. They all confirm the systemic failure of the administration. We look at institutional accountability. Our institutions are explicitly designed to stop exactly this kind of abuse of power. They are failing completely. We look at the Department of Justice and the federal courts. Federal enforcement agencies like ICE and Border Patrol are operating with a severe lack of discipline. New recruits are being thrown into the streets with heavily curtailed training. Career Border Patrol agents and local police officers are deeply offended and disgusted by the recklessness of these new recruits. Some have even become institutional whistleblowers, exposing the lack of training to media outlets. But where is the institutional accountability? It does not exist. When violence occurred in Minnesota, resulting in the execution-style killing of American citizens, the investigation was immediately taken away from the state. Moving the legal jurisdiction ensures that real accountability will not happen. The federal enforcement apparatus is aggressively protecting itself from local judicial scrutiny. We look at the White House and Congress. The White House recognizes the political damage. They held a meeting at Doral to explicitly tell House Republicans to stop talking about mass deportations. They admitted it is killing them in the polls. They recognized that Secretary Kristi Noem was the toxic face of the policy, leading to her removal. But they did not stop the underlying policy. The quotas set by Stephen Miller remain unrescinded. The administration merely took its foot off the gas for the time being to wait and see the polling data. Congress is fully aware that Senator Lindsey Graham is acting as an intermediary for a foreign country, actively coaching foreign leaders on how to manipulate the American president. Yet Congress has taken absolutely no institutional action to stop him or hold him accountable. The institutions of oversight are totally paralyzed. The federal courts are bypassed. The enforcement agencies are weaponized. We close with the procedural consequences. There is no hope here. There is no hype. There are only the cold, mechanical realities of what happens next. The war in Iran will continue without a clear objective. American taxpayers will continue to be billed $1 billion every single day. The United States military will remain engaged in a foreign conflict that 71% of Americans expect to last for months or years. The death toll of service members and foreign civilians will predictably rise. Domestically, the deportation quotas have not been rescinded. The foot may be off the gas temporarily, but the machinery of mass detention remains fully operational. Stephen Miller remains firmly in his position as Deputy Chief of Staff with enormous power to dictate enforcement numbers. The investigations into the deaths of American citizens at the hands of reckless ICE recruits will remain completely out of state jurisdiction, neutralizing the threat of local prosecution. The polls will continue to show the president underwater on the economy, inflation, and immigration. Gas prices are up, groceries are up, and health insurance costs are through the roof. The White House will continue to instruct Republicans to hide their true policy goals from the public as the midterms approach. Carolyn Leavitt will continue to use press briefings on the war to push unrelated domestic legislation like the SAVE Act. Pete Hegseth will continue to act like he is starring in an action movie while serving as a profoundly stupid figure in this administration. These are the concrete procedural realities. The lies have been clearly defined. The forensic evidence has been meticulously presented. The law has been thoroughly explained. The professional judgment is final.